Welcome to the Tristen Law Show. If it's your first time here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. I am Tristen Law. Today we are going to be talking about the 6-episode documentary, Mr. McMahon, that appeared on Netflix. It dropped on Wednesday at 3:01 a.m. I had no clue that it dropped at 3:01 a.m. I'm sitting there Wednesday morning wondering when the documentary was going to drop, and then Netflix said, hey, it's here. So I watched it, and because I watched it, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the central theme. The central theme was the blurred lines between the Mr. McMahon and the Vince McMahon persona. It was such a, if I'm going to sum up this whole documentary, I'm just going to say wow. The reason why I'm saying wow is because we've never in our lives got to see Vince McMahon in an environment where, well, we have, but it's been very rare. But we haven't been able to see Vince McMahon lately in an environment to where he couldn't control. He always controlled everything in the WWE, and we see that full-fledged in the documentary. I binge watched it. It was 6 episodes. It's about an hour each episode. They go in depth of who Vince McMahon is. I think this is the closest that we'll probably ever get to a Vince McMahon book. But let's take a quick look at every single episode, and I'll talk about some of the notes that I put in as well too. So episode 1 of the McMahon podcast, of the McMahon documentary was titled Junior. It's titled Junior because Vince McMahon was named after his dad. He is Vince McMahon Jr. It talked about how Vince McMahon got into the wrestling business, how he bought the business from his dad, how he pretty much took the pro wrestling business and turned the pro wrestling business on its head. It talked about his upbringing and stuff like that. And there was one statement that Vince McMahon made in that first episode that really resonated with me. And he was talking about how pro wrestling is just a part of Americana. Pro wrestling is such a part of Americana. And that statement, to me, it made me sit back and go, pro wrestling is just as American as baseball. Pro wrestling is just as American as apple pie. Yes, they have baseball in other countries, and yes, they have apple pie in other countries, and yes, they have pro wrestling in other countries. But pro wrestling, the WWE, WWF, is as American as it gets, right? Whenever you think of pro wrestling, you think about the WWF, you think about Vince McMahon. When somebody used to mention Ed McMahon, that used to do Publishers Clearinghouse, people thought that Ed McMahon and Vince McMahon were related, right? So it's just that pro wrestling is just so American. And without pro wrestling being in America, what would America be like? They talk about in that documentary in episode 1, Junior, of McMahon on Netflix, how Gorilla Monsoon, he was a pro wrestler, and he was I guess you would call it an executive at the time at the WWF, but he was the heir apparent. He was the one that was supposed to buy the WWF, or was supposed to be next in line to buy the WWF from Vince McMahon's dad. And thinking about it now, the world of pro wrestling, as we know it today, there's an alternate timeline today where pro wrestling is different because Vince McMahon never bought the company from his dad, okay? So the way that wrestling worked back in the day was that it was everybody had a territory and everybody played in their box, right? You didn't cross over my line and I didn't cross over yours. And pretty much what Vince McMahon did when he took over the WWF, when he bought it from his dad, was that he crossed those lines. He was a forward thinker. He was thinking of ways that he can take his company, the WWF, and bring it outside of the territory, which spanned from Maine to Washington, D.C., and went as far west as Pennsylvania. The way that he was going to capitalize on his business was to go in everybody else's sandbox. And what he did was, he took wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura and everybody else, and he pretty much stepped on toes. That's something that Gorilla Monsoon probably would have never done, and we would still be 40 years later still watching WWF because it only took place in this area, right? In the episode talking about Vince himself, you see in episode 1 that Vince McMahon is very competitive. And you know what? I think Vince McMahon isn't afraid of anything. Vince McMahon isn't afraid of anything. Vince McMahon he's very competitive. He always wants to compete. And we know as pro wrestling fans, right, that Vince McMahon is best when he is competing. Vince McMahon has competed against the federal government multiple times. He's competed against multiple lawsuits. He's competed against WCW. He's competed against other pro wrestling promotions. That's just what he does. Vince McMahon likes to compete. Vince McMahon he even tried to compete one time with the NFL when he opened up the XFL and he failed. I don't think Vince McMahon likes to fail. And like pretty much who likes to fail? Okay. In the beginning of McMahon, in episode 1, Junior, Vince McMahon was painted by Triple H, his son-in-law, as only letting people know just so much about him. And I personally think that Vince McMahon being too known, letting people know who he really is, will expose his flaws. And when Vince McMahon exposes his flaws, it'll make him vulnerable. Okay, I think that's one of the only things Vince McMahon is afraid of, is being vulnerable. And him being vulnerable and exposing his flaws will not make him be in control, and he needs to be in control. However, the first episode, it sets the table. We really understand who Vince McMahon is and how his brain works. I got from that first episode that Vince McMahon is a forward thinker, he's a risk taker, and he's not afraid of much, and that's how he built the WWE. We end that episode on the scandals that captured Vince and the WWE in the early 80s, and the late 80s, and the very early 90s. The second episode was titled Heat. Now, if you're not a pro wrestler or really like into the jargon, I'll tell you what heat is. Heat is the negative reaction from the crowd. That's when everybody's booing you, or, you know, the heat is how you react to the bad guys, okay? You don't cheer the bad guys. You give the bad guys get heat, okay? So in episode 2 called Heat, it was the rise of WrestleMania and early WWF scandals. We were looking at WrestleMania 1, and then they gave us WrestleMania 1, Vince McMahon pretty much bet the farm. Him and his wife, Linda, mortgaged everything that they owned just to make sure WrestleMania could happen. There is a timeline where WrestleMania doesn't occur. WrestleMania 1 occurred in Madison Square Garden. Now WrestleMania takes place in football stadiums where they're packing hundreds of thousands of ass cheeks in seats in one place. They went from packing only a couple thousand to 100,000 people in an arena at one time. Looking at WrestleMania 2, it shows that Vince McMahon was such a forward thinker and such a risk taker. He put WrestleMania on in 3 places at one time. That is the only WrestleMania that took place in 3 places at one time. It took place in New York City, it took place in Chicago, and it took place in Los Angeles. 3 places at one time. Logistical nightmare, okay? And Vince McMahon even said himself that's something that he would never do again. But then WrestleMania 3 was the coming of age for the WWE. That was the cake that was the icing on the cake. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. WrestleMania 3, before WrestleMania 3, pro wrestling was a thing that was seen as for lower class citizens. It was for the hillbillies. It was for people that weren't like, you know, affluent. All right. The affluent people went to boxing. That's where they went. They left. They didn't go to wrestling. They went to boxing. They put big money on boxing. But when WrestleMania 3 occurred, that made middle class Americans fans, which brought WWE more money than ever before. WrestleMania 3 was WWE's like big money maker. I think without WrestleMania 3 that we wouldn't have pro wrestling like we have it is now. It's now. Like, big money is spent on pro wrestling. What I mean by big money, I once went to WrestleMania, the chair that I'm sitting on right now. I think we paid $800 for each seat. And when I got there, they said you could take the seat home. I'm like, damn, only the seat I can get to take for $800, right? Pro wrestling is big money. Yeah, you can go to pro wrestling. You can go to WrestleMania for maybe like 40, 50 bucks, maybe 60 bucks, but you're sitting way up in the top, way up in the top. But if you want to sit close, you're spending at least $1,000. I didn't sit close, but I sat close enough, and I still got to take a chair home. Imagine what the people spent that sat front row. I've seen tickets that are $2,000 talking about they're going to WrestleMania. If it wasn't for WrestleMania 3, we would not, WWE pro wrestling period wouldn't be something that the middle class or even upper class people even got involved in. Look, it's so, WrestleMania 3 made pro wrestling no longer taboo that even Donald Trump likes pro wrestling. Okay, moving on. Episode 3 was titled The Screwjob. The reason why they titled episode 3 The Screwjob, it talked about primarily the Montreal Screwjob, which was between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, where Vince McMahon pretty much laid down the law. Bret Hart didn't want to do business properly. And when I mean that Bret Hart didn't want to do business properly, it was just meaning that Bret Hart didn't want to drop the belt, right? In pro wrestling, we the wrestlers, we understand what pro wrestling is. Obviously, we're in it. We understand it's predetermined. We understand that you don't really win titles. You're really just given titles, right? For the lack of a better term, some people even say that the titles are props. But for us, we believe that we work so hard and that we legitimately beat somebody in the ring that we're not just going to give up the title. It's crazy the mind of how a pro wrestler's mind works, right? Bret Hart did not want to give up the championship. He wanted to do it a certain way. He wanted to end it in a schmaz. And a schmaz is pretty much that there's no finish. The referee pretty much throws out the match. So you get a lot of wrestling terms today. The match ends with no finish, and it's just like undecided. And then they'll figure it out again later on. But Bret Hart was leaving the company, and he wanted to leave with the belt. But Vince McMahon couldn't do that because he got burned years before. He got burned when Medusa, she took the women's championship and went to WCW and threw it in the trash. Vince McMahon did not want his world championship title thrown in the trash on national TV. But what I learned from that documentary was that there was an original screw job. Some people called it the New York City screw job. And that was where what is her name? There's a female wrestler. She didn't want to give up the championship. And if you remember what it is, just drop it in the comments. Right now, you could drop it in the comments if you're watching live. But she didn't want to give up the belt. She refused to give up the belt. And what Vince McMahon said was, excuse me for what I'm going to say, children, cover your ears. He said, F it. We're just going to make her. And I don't believe they had a Fabulous Moolah dressed up in all black in a mask, and they call her like the Spider Woman or something like that. You get into the ring and don't know it's Moolah? You worked Moolah, the woman, oh God, what's her name? What is her name? The name just came to me and I lost it. But you wrestled so long with Moolah that you didn't know who she was? I don't believe that. And there's a lot of things that I have a hard time believing, and this is just me as a pro wrestler. I have a hard time believing a lot of things that I saw in that documentary, because here's one of the things that I learned as a pro wrestler. Everything is a work. And even when we're told that it's a shoot, that it's a work. And work means that it's just a work of art. It's a part of the show. And shoot means that it's real. So like, for example, I'm shoot sitting in front of you right now, and I'm work sitting in a studio, okay? Now that you understand the terms. So I didn't believe a lot of things that I saw on that documentary, because you know what? Some things I couldn't really tell what's a work and what's a shoot. And even when you told me that it's a work, that it's a shoot, it's still a work to me. One of the things they also talked about in episode 3, Screwjob, they talked about the steroid trial when the feds brought Vince McMahon to court, and they were talking about him giving wrestlers steroids. They were talking about Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was in there, and he was testifying against Vince McMahon. And the feds gave Hulk Hogan immunity. Listen to what I'm telling you. The feds don't give anybody immunity unless they have something on you. So my question is, what is it that they had on Hulk Hogan that we don't know? Okay? The question is that Hulk Hogan was probably just as dirty. Well, he was dirty, but not as dirty as Hulk Hogan. I mean, as Vince McMahon, to where they say, you know what, we don't really want you. You're a small level. We really want Vince. What is it that Hulk Hogan did that he got immunity? Like, look at it right now with the Diddy trial, right? They're saying that the whole P. Diddy, Sean Combs thing, they're saying right now, the feds, that if you know something, come to us before it's too late. That's where you come and you snitch. You go, yo, I know Diddy did X, Y, and Z. But because I told you that, look, how about you just give me probation or I sit and I testify against him, okay? Hulk Hogan testified against Vince McMahon, but from what Hulk Hogan said, he said that he shocked the feds because he didn't tell them what they thought he was going to say. He said the truth. And then again, we don't believe Hulk Hogan. If you're a wrestling fan, or if you're not a wrestling fan, I'm going to tell you now, Hulk Hogan is a liar. He's a liar. He associates himself with liars as well, too. I'm not making this a political thing, but Hulk Hogan is a liar. He's a liar. He's lied about multiple things. You can look on YouTube and just type in Hulk Hogan liar, and you'll just watch all the videos that he lied on. One of the things that we talked about as well, too, earlier was how Vince McMahon likes the competition, and Vince McMahon even competed against WCW. And one of the things that was a topic a couple months ago was who was responsible for the closure of WCW. And I'm telling you who was responsible for the closure of WCW. It was Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff is 100% at the bottom for, he's at the helm for the reason why WCW went out of business. And they talked about this briefly in episode 3, and this is what I took from it. Vince McMahon was poked. He was poked and prodded and aggravated and annoyed by WCW and Eric Bischoff so much that Vince McMahon didn't sell at first. And in pro wrestling, teaching another term, there's a lot of terms in here that you're going to learn. Selling. So now when you're wrestling in the ring, if somebody hits you, boom, that's a no sell, right? But if somebody hits you, boom, oh, that's a sell, okay? So sell is the reaction, okay? So one of the things that Vince McMahon doesn't do and didn't do at the time was that he didn't sell the whole fact that WCW had their foot on his throat. Eric Bischoff went for Vince McMahon so much that Vince McMahon finally had to sell it. He made Vince McMahon react. That is the sole reason why WCW went out of business and Vince McMahon bought WCW for, what was it, $2 million? I think Vince McMahon made that $2 million. Vince McMahon has long well made that $2 million back. I think Vince McMahon made that $2 million back within the first 2 years after buying WCW. Eric Bischoff even said it in that documentary, McMahon, that you could watch on Netflix in episode 3. He was cocky. He was cocky. He didn't think that, Vince McMahon was anybody to be worried about, that Vince McMahon was stuck in this bubble, in this way that he was just going to do things. But no, if you watch episode 1, Vince McMahon is a forward thinker and he's a risk taker. He thought forward of how he could change the business, and he took risks. In that episode, he also talked about the curtain call. The curtain call, it was this big thing in Madison Square Garden right before Scott Hall, who was Razor Ramon, and Kevin Nash, who was Diesel. They were in the ring with Triple H and Shawn Michaels, 2 good guys and 2 bad guys. And what they did was they all raised their hands because they were all legit friends, and signifying that the 2 were going to WCW. This is something that pro wrestling fans at the time, and even now, should have never known about. They should have never known about it. The reason why, they should never known about it, because 1, it was not a televised event. But there was video footage because somebody snuck a video camera in there. If you're bored and looking for something to do and you're a pro wrestling fan, sometimes just Google WWF, home video, like fan camera, and you'll see that people legit recorded all of the events. They recorded this event and distributed it, and then you were able to see, wait a minute, the good guys and the bad guys, they're like friends. Like for years, people have been telling us that this is predetermined, but now we know. Because of that, oh my God, it's such a taboo for the babyface, the good guys, and the heels, the bad guys, to be in the same place at one time. I once worked I once wrestled a pro wrestling show, and they even separated us. They had the good guys sitting one side and the bad guys sitting in the other locker room. There's 2 separate locker rooms, right? Some people just believe in that kayfabe so much. That's what's called kayfabe, when you keep the secret. They believe in kayfabe so much that it was taboo. And if you ask me, at the time, if I was in the wrestling business at the time, it was taboo. It was something that wasn't supposed to be done. The good guys and the bad guys shouldn't have been out there, frolicking and holding hands and just having a great time, showing everybody that they're friends. This was something, kayfabe, that I even practiced when I first started wrestling full-time in like early, mid 2009. If I was sitting in a room with a bunch of other wrestlers and a fan would walk in, or somebody that's not in the business, someone would go kayfabe, and all the heels would walk one way and all the baby faces would walk another way. Literally, you would say kayfabe and everybody would go separate ways. Triple H took the heat for that, for the whole thing. Vince McMahon couldn't punish Vince McMahon couldn't punish Diesel or Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He couldn't punish them because they were going to WCW. It's one of those things like, what you want to do? Fire me? I'm already leaving. Vince McMahon couldn't punish Shawn Michaels because that was his top babyface. That was his champion. So who was left to take the fall? Damn, Triple H. That was the year that Triple H was supposed to win the King of the Ring. And the King of the Ring tournament at the time propelled you into stardom to become the next WWF champion at the time. That was the year that Stone Cold Steve Austin became the King of the Ring and propelled him into heights that he never saw before. Looking back at it now, Triple H, even though he took the heat for it, damn, look at him. Look at his career. Triple H has had a fantastic career. Fantastic career, even though that's what he had to do. That episode, though, if you ask me, episode 3, the Screwjob, I think that was a pretty good episode. We finally got to hear from Vince McMahon about the Montreal Screwjob from Vince himself. That was one of the perks about watching this documentary, is that you've heard a lot of these stories for years and years and years, but you never really heard them from the mouth of Vince McMahon. Yes, there was a WWE-produced documentary called McMahon, but that was in the sterile studio of the WWE. This one was not in the sterile studio of the WWE. The story that was going to be told was not the story that's going to be dominated by Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon was not the EP. There was nobody that was the executive producer for this Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary that worked for the WWE. But if you like what I'm talking about so far, I want you to subscribe so you can stay up to date to future episodes. I do interviews and I do in-depth discussions about things that happen in the pro wrestling business. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me so you don't miss anything. To me, a subscribe is very humbling, because I don't ask people that I know to subscribe. Everybody that I know that has subscribed because they genuinely like what I do. And people that I don't know that subscribe, they have subscribed because they genuinely like what I do. So if you're subscribing, or if you're watching and not subscribed, I appreciate the subscription from you. I am humbled by you. Episode 4 of the Mr. McMahon documentary was called Attitude. And that talks about the Attitude Era and the tragic death of Owen Hart. The Attitude Era, I've talked about it so much on this channel, and there's still so much more to talk about it, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But if you really are curious about some topics that I have about the Attitude Era, go check the playlists. There are a couple episodes that released before and some that will be releasing in the future. But in a nutshell, the Attitude Era is pretty much the time when WWE pretty much, they took it to WCW. They fought with WCW. And that's when pro wrestling became edgy at the time. Thinking about it and watching the documentary, I talked about how, in a previous episode of the Tristen Wall Show, how I feel that women were objectified in the WWE during the Attitude Era. They were there for sex. They were there for T and A, and maybe some P, right? And looking at it now, almost 20 years later, I'm like, wow, that wasn't right. But looking at it at the time, it was what America was at the time, right? You had movies like American Pie. You had so many different things that sexualized women at the time. Was it right? No, it wasn't right. But that was what America was at the time. If you look at it in this light, Black people used to be slaves way back in the day, right? But we have progressed forward to understand that that is not okay behavior. And now we've understand in 2024 that it's not okay to sexualize women, and that women are just as good as men. And if you ask me, I think that women are better than men in some situations. In some situations. For example, having a kid. I can't have a kid come out of me. Okay, I can have some poop. That's the only thing that'll come out of me. I can't have no kid come out of me. I think that's one of the things where I think that women are great. And back during the Attitude Era, that wasn't something that really they focused on. They just focused on the sexiness. They focused on the raunchiness of the woman. And you know what? I'm glad that we've come a far way, because now you're getting awesome pro wrestlers that are female, and they pretty much hold their own. But they talk about Owen Hart passing, and Owen Hart is the brother of Bret Hart, and he passed away at it was March 1999. I think about him in May 23rd, 1999, at the Over the Edge event, where Owen Hart tragically fell from the top of the arena into the ring. One of the things that they show is the blood. They show the blood on the apron on the ring from Owen Hart. And one of the things that I think about was like, wow, I remember watching that as a kid. In 1999, I might have been 14 years old. And I remember watching, and I don't remember the blood, but seeing the blood to me on the ring today as a 39-year-old, it was so eerie to me. It was eerie, it was spooky, it was creepy. And it was like, yo, like, the show still went on. You never got to hear from Vince McMahon himself about the tragic passing, about the accident of Owen Hart. But one of the things that Vince McMahon is criticized about is that the show went on, and at the end, after the lawsuit and everything, and after the investigation, it was chalked up as an accident. And you know what? That was it, right? One of the things that I've learned from watching this whole thing is that Vince McMahon, you know what? I'm going to give you that. Just hold on to that. That's called the tease. Hold on to that. I'm going to tell you what I think about Vince McMahon in a little bit. Just hang out with me for a little bit. But yeah, people judge Vince McMahon for keeping the show going on after Owen Hart fell from the top. The next segment after the fall, was where Double J, Jeff Jarrett, and Deborah were getting ready to go out to the ring. And they were legit friends with Owen Hart. And you see Deborah there boo-hooing in the background. I am not going to lie. If I was Owen Hart and I had fallen from the top and I had passed away, I would probably still want the show to go on, even though I passed away and stuff like that. Why? Because I wouldn't want the show to end on a sad point, right? Let's still send everybody home happy. Maybe that's just the entertainer in me, right? I'm just thinking about, people paid their hard-earned money. Let's still give them the entertainment. Let's not send everybody home and like, wow, that guy passed away today in the wrestling ring. Like, no, let's just keep the show going. We'll take care of everything. Like what is it that I can do? I can't do anything now. You're not disrespecting my honor. But you know what? That's one of the things that we'll never really get to know about, because, we can't really talk to people that are passed away. Looking at episode 5 is called Family Business. That talk about WWF's rebranding to WWE and the Ruthless Aggression era. We really got to dive into Vince McMahon and his family. His son, Shane, his daughter, Stephanie, who's married to Triple H, and his wife, Linda McMahon. And I'm telling you this, you notice real quick that their family is different. Their family is unlike any family that you've ever seen before. For example, Vince McMahon wanted to do a storyline to where he wanted to impregnate Stephanie. That's crazy. That's wild. But in the grand scheme of things, a lot of people are giving Vince McMahon heat for that. But here's how Vince seen it. And here's how I see it as well, too. They're on television, right? They're acting. They're portraying a role. Vince McMahon's not really, I'm hoping, that he's really not going to impregnate his daughter on national TV. Is it a crazy storyline? It's bonkers. It's off the wall. Off the wall. It's out of this world. I don't know how anybody would even think of something like that, but it's TV. It's nothing crazy that you wouldn't see in a soap opera or something like that. Maybe some kind of soap opera. I don't know. Some TV shows, right? But that would definitely make Vince, look, I don't even know how we'd even see Vince McMahon today, knowing that all that stuff happened. We talked about Shane and his dad getting into a wrestling match, and Shane saying that he'd never put a hand on his dad, and in the wrestling match it was time to go. They wrestled on pay-per-view and it's time to go, and Shane McMahon was afraid to hit his dad, right? Which is good. You should have a little bit of fear as a child of your parent. I'm 39 years old. I'm still afraid of my mother. Don't tell her that. She might be watching. But like, you still got to have some kind of fear in your heart around your parents. And what Vince McMahon did in the beginning of the ring, in the beginning of that match, was he slapped Shane twice. And I think he even punched him one time. And that slap knocked him out of it, and they went on and they put on the match. And looking at that whole thing, it's like, yo, Vince McMahon is just such a performer. To him, it was the performance. It was the show. It was the show. Vince McMahon even said that he always wanted to be a wrestler. That one time he even dyed his hair blonde, right? And it was just a show. Vince McMahon just wanted to do the show. He wanted to be a part of the show, but he also owned the business at the same exact time. So when you really sit there and you're holding Vince McMahon's feet to the fire and saying that he's a terrible person because of all the things that he did to his family, how he had an on-screen affair, and his wife was right there comatose because they drugged her, like, it's TV. It's TV. But pro wrestling is one of those things that lives on the line. Pro wrestling, you don't really know what pro wrestling is, like, because whenever you watch pro wrestling, you always assume that it takes place now. You don't assume that it took place yesterday. You don't assume that it took place tomorrow. It's not like Law and Order SVU, right? It's not like Star Trek or Star Wars. Pro wrestling takes place now. So you hold it the same exact canon as the NBA, the NFL, and those kind of shows, which makes it must-watch TV at the time. So, like, even though we saw real people in there, they're just portraying characters just like everybody else. The last episode was called The Finish. The finish is the end of the match, right? The finish is the last episode of this documentary. It talks about the Chris Benoit tragedy, the WWE wellness policy, and McMahon's final resignation amidst the sexual allegations against him after WWE being bought by TKO, which also owns UFC. You never really got to hear Vince McMahon get to talk about what he felt around the Chris Benoit tragedy. And when you watch that, you finally get to hear it. It's not from somebody else. It's not from hearsay. It's directly from Vince. You see that Vince came into it kind of ignorant, that he didn't really believe at the time that, people getting multiple concussions could cause somebody to go crazy. And that's when WWF started changing because Vince McMahon said, you know what? I don't know. Okay, so you know what? Bring me the research. Let me look at the research and let me go ahead and make the decision. Sometimes, you just got to realize that you're not the smartest person in the room and just trust somebody else to handle it for you. And that's one of the reasons why WWE stopped doing chair shots to the head. Me personally, as a wrestler, I don't get hit in the head. Okay, I have I had a concussion? Yeah, I probably had less than 10 concussions. Maybe if I'm thinking about maybe 6. I definitely remember my first one. I was wrestling my friend in a match and I hit my head, my temple hit his knee, and I can't remember the match. I had to watch it back to remember it. But imagine being a WWE wrestler at the time. You're wrestling for so long, and then all of a sudden you get some kind of concussion every single night. Every single night you're getting a concussion. So it's like, I'm glad that WWF has came forward to realize that you don't need to hit somebody in the head to tell the story. At the time, was it the norm? Yes, it was the norm. You don't need to blade to cut yourself in the ring to tell the story. It doesn't happen. It does happen now in the WWE. It doesn't happen as often unless it's really known to tell the story. The wellness policy was definitely WWE taking accountability as a corporate entity. Not Vince McMahon himself, but as a corporate entity to make sure that people were no longer dying from drug abuse, right? There was a time that people were 39 years old, less than 40. There were people that were around my age, 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, dying, and they were pro wrestlers. 10, 20, 30 years ago, as a pro wrestler, I probably wouldn't be here right now to sit in front of you and talk to you about things that are going on in the pro wrestling business. To me, that's the crazy part. It's crazy to me to think about things like that. And WWE took advantage of that by taking care of the wrestlers. The wellness policy part of the wellness policy pretty much states that if you've ever been on the contract for the WWE, if you have any kind of alcohol or drug dependency, they'll send you to rehab, and rehab is 100% free. I think for any company to do that, that is commendable. And I think a lot more personal, private companies and public companies should do something along those lines as well too. You can't just chew us up and spit us out and then expect us to move on with our lives with whatever happens to us. I've worked for companies, right? And I got carpal tunnel from working for certain companies. I'll say it. I worked for Walmart. I worked for Walmart and I got carpal tunnel, right? But they don't say, okay, well, because you typed on computers and you used your fingers so much in small little minute ways that you got carpal tunnel, that we'll go ahead and give you the therapy that you may need. You know what? I just deal with it on my own because that's not what Walmart does. But WWE, I commend them for taking care of anybody that ever had a drug problem and alcohol problem, and they send them to rehab. But it's not that they send them to rehab one time. They send them to rehab as many times as they need for them to go ahead and get clean. The wellness policy also tested people as well too backstage for drugs and for alcohol. And I think that right now the WWE pro wrestling period, well, I can't speak about pro, let me talk about WWE. WWE is probably the cleanest that it's ever been. I think the only thing that's acceptable in the wellness policy, because I did read it a couple years ago, was weed, right? Before you smoke weed, you took some gummies or whatever, you were a little high, you would pay a fine. Now you can smoke weed and do those kind of things in WWE. I personally think, and I've been at pro wrestling shows where I've had to wrestle people that when some people come to the pro wrestling show and think it's a party. They want to take pills, they want to do drugs, they want to drink. And for me, I don't care what it is that you do, just don't do it before the match. Don't come into the match high or drunk. Like, I think that's unprofessional. I don't think that's a way that you should manage yourself in a professional setting. The first word in wrestling is what? Professional. And I think that those kind of businesses or those kind of practices were not professional. But Vince McMahon was eventually forced to retire because of the allegations that were made against him, the sexual allegations that were made against him, the one that he's currently being investigated for, and such and such. Vince McMahon said one quote in that documentary, and one of the quotes that I remember was that he doesn't understand why people retire. When you go home to retire, he doesn't have any sympathy for you. So if you're going to go home and retire, go home and just die. And I think that WWE was going to, if everything never happened with Vince McMahon the way it went, was that Vince McMahon would still be wrestling for the WWE until the day they put him in the hole. They would dig the hole, put him in the hole, and the next day they would figure out who was going to run the WWE. Vince McMahon was not letting go of the WWE because you know what? He didn't want to go home and die. I think that's one of the flaws. We talked about early in this episode how Vince McMahon didn't want to show his flaws. And one of his flaws, Vince McMahon says that he's not afraid of anything. I think one of the things that Vince McMahon is afraid of is dying. You know why? He's not in control of it. Vince McMahon has been in a lot of control of a lot of things, right? Vince McMahon has been in control of his character. He's even been in control to some of the allegations made behind him, made towards him, to where he just paid the settlement money and just moved on with his life. He was in control that way. He's been in control of his character and his characters on television. But when it comes to different things, like I've heard that Vince McMahon can't even sneeze. Vince McMahon does not like sneezing because he can't control it. And that brings me to believe that Vince McMahon did not want to retire because Vince McMahon would be afraid to die because he can't control it. He can't control when he dies. Okay? He can control when he wakes up every day. He can control when he goes to sleep. He can control when he eats. He can control how much money he spends and makes, but he can't control whether he dies, and that's why he didn't want to retire. The allegation about Vince McMahon, look, man, there are allegations at this time. I've read everything that everybody else has read on the internet. I don't want to be a part of the court of public opinion. I think that there is a legal process that can go forth, and once the legal process comes forth, I would love to take a look at all the evidence and look at myself and be like, you know what, did Vince McMahon do it? You know what? Look, based on the text message that I see, is Vince McMahon a little freaky? Not a little freaky, a lot of freaky. He's not a little freaky, he's a lot of freaky. He's into some really nasty things. And if he's into sharing the girl with his homeboys, yeah, it's kind of wild behavior as well too, really wild behavior. But Vince McMahon talks about, in the documentary, his mind running on different computers. That one computer is focused on one thing, and Vince McMahon is focused, and the other mind is focused on something else. And the producer says, well, what is it focused on? And Vince McMahon says, something a lot more fun, a lot more pleasurable, like sex. And it's like, yo, Vince McMahon's a sex addict. He a little freak. And if you go back and you look at all of the things that Vince McMahon has done in the Attitude Era, a lot of them are centered around sex. Vince McMahon got to kiss his employees. Granted, he was acting as Mr. McMahon, not Vince McMahon. He was acting as Mr. McMahon. So he got to kiss his employees. He's got to spank his employees. He's got to do all kinds of freaky things with his employees, or have his employees do freaky things with everybody else on television because he likes it. I think Vince McMahon is a sex addict. He likes sex. And maybe that goes back to the beginning of the documentary, to where he talks about that he was sexually abused by his mother, and he was physically abused by his mother's husband, his stepfather. So that probably goes to show that why he is who he is today. But that's no excuse for his bad behavior. One of the things that I always say is that because things have happened to us in the past that have made us who we are today, we have to be able to go ahead and take the steps to make ourselves a better person. Go to therapy. There are a lot of you right now that are looking at me right now, and I'm telling you this. There's something bothering your life, go to therapy. If you ever need help, you could always reach out to me at The Real Big Tris on Instagram, and you can say, hey, look, Tristen, I'm struggling. I need some kind of therapy. I can do what I can do to help you. I'll be honest, I've went, because who you were yesterday will make you who you are tomorrow. And because of the things that you went through yesterday, because some of them were wrong, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay for you to be who you are. Go take care of yourself. Stop being an asshole to people. Go to therapy. So now here's the thing now, right? When you're looking at the central theme of Vince McMahon versus Mr. McMahon, the question that I ask myself is, where does the Mr. McMahon character start and where does the Vince McMahon character end? So Vince McMahon, once again, we talked about Vince McMahon wanted to be in control. He likes to be in control, and one of the things that he wasn't in control of was this documentary. It was not in the sterile house of the WWE production studio. And Vince McMahon sent out a tweet, a press release, I guess, a comment on this, and I'm going to share that comment that he said to you on said to us on Twitter. It pretty much says that Vince McMahon has expressed a disappointment with the Netflix documentary, and he says that it distorts the truth by confusing his real-life persona with his on-screen character, Mr. McMahon. He criticized the documentary for leaving out important details and using misleading editing tricks to confuse viewers. Vince also referenced a lawsuit related to a past affair as an example of how the documentary misrepresents his life. He concluded by urging people to keep an open mind, reminding them that there are always two sides to every story. Okay, so how do I feel that the Mr. McMahon and the Vince McMahon? Look, sometimes in pro wrestling, we believe what we believe so much that we don't even know where one starts and where one ends. Coming up pretty soon, I'm going to be reading some of your comments. So if you got a comment, go ahead and drop it in there. I want to know what you thought about the documentary. So drop it in the comments. I'm going to read some comments that I got on Threads as well too. But how do I feel? Man, look, Vince McMahon even said himself, he even doesn't know where it ends and where it starts, right? He even said in the beginning as well too that he just want to let us know a little bit, not a lot of bit about him, just a little bit. Do I agree with Vince's criticism? Look, is it misleading editing tricks? It could be. Could it be to confuse us? It could be, right? Does it distort the truth between Mr. McMahon and Vince McMahon? It could, but he said that himself in the documentary that he doesn't even know when one starts and one stops. The editing and selective storytelling, one of the things that I learned when I went to broadcasting school was that documentaries are not made sitting around and just recording people and just asking them questions. No. Every good documentary that you've ever watched is because of the editor. The editor and the producer that sits back after all the information is gathered and puts it together are the people that deserve the pats on the back for good documentaries. So do I think that the documentary used out of context footage? Do I think that the editing team biased or fair? I'll tell you this. One of the producers for the show, he produced 30 for 30 on Bill Simmons. He produced 30 for 30 on ESPN. I never heard anybody ever complain that 30 for 30 was untrue. He produced a documentary for Andre the Giant, if I'm not mistaken, which appeared on HBO, and he even produced a documentary just like McMahon, but it was a lot shorter, for the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and appeared on ESPN. So like, now we're just going to say that everything is unbiased and fair? I think that one of the things that anybody that's making a documentary could do is try to be as fair and biased as possible to go ahead and get the story out. But I don't believe in my heart that anything was unfair. Granted, I did hear times that, because I edit audio and I edit video, you can hear when the audio jumps. If you listen to when the audio jumps, they could have clipped out words. But I think 100%, you know what, I'm not going to tell you right there. I'm going to hold on to that as well too. But the two sides to every story. How does Vince McMahon's perspective change how I see the documentary? Me personally, doesn't change it at all. Doesn't change it at all. I feel that Vince McMahon even went out there with his own mouth and just pretty much said, you know what, there's the McMahon and there's the Vince McMahon. There's two different. So like that little thing that he sent out there was, I think it was a little bit of damage control, because that was him just trying to have at least a little bit of control over something that he didn't have control over. Vince McMahon even tried to buy it. He tried to buy the rights so it wouldn't air on Netflix the way that it went. There were interviews where people asked Vince McMahon, where people asked people around Vince, where does Vince start and where does Vince end? Are they even one and the same? And people don't know. Nobody really gave a definitive answer of where Vince McMahon start and where Vince McMahon end. And as I said before, Vince McMahon doesn't even know where he starts and where he ends, okay? So, like, I think that's one of the coolest parts about the show is that, like, they held his feet to the fire. And I think that's one of the best questions that they asked. And nobody, including Vince McMahon, could even answer that question. So my thoughts on the documentary and my thoughts of Vince McMahon and Vince McMahon, I don't think that it was anything that we didn't already know. I personally think that it was an outstanding documentary. I'm thinking that you should watch it if you are a wrestling fan or are not a wrestling fan. If it was still the time where you can share Netflix passwords, I give you my password so you can watch it. But I can't give you my password so you can watch it. So I suggest that you go ahead and just buy it. Just buy it for 1 month and just watch that. Watching that documentary on Netflix signified to me one thing that I've been saying for a long time. Pro wrestling is really popular. Netflix has 3 things that I can think of off the top of my head that are related to pro wrestling. One being Heels. The pro wrestling show is on there. The other one is the show about Ohio Valley Wrestling. That's on there. And now this one. And now they're going to put WWE Raw on Netflix in the future. Yo, pro wrestling is pretty popular right now. Any moments that shocked me the most? I don't think anything really shocked me. Actually, no, I'm lying. One of the things that shocked me was being able to hear all the stories from Vince McMahon himself. Because like I said, you never heard anything from Vince McMahon. You always heard everything from everybody else that was in a sterile environment around Vince. So I think that nothing shocked me really out of the man. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe. Actually, no, I can tell you what shocked me. What shocked me was hearing that Vince McMahon was a sex addict. Where he was talking, the way he was talking about sex through the whole entire thing. I'm like, no, you a little freaky, bro. You freaky. Okay, you know what? I don't care if anybody's freaky. Be as freaky as you want to, as long as it's with 2 consenting adults and everybody's down for the pound. Was it fair? I think the documentary was very fair against Vince McMahon. And me, I am a fan of Vince McMahon, the mind, the person who built the WWE, all that other mess that he does in his personal life. I'm not a fan of that. If he's doing things to people without their consent, I'm not a fan to that at all. But I'm a huge fan of Vince McMahon. I always wanted to hear a documentary from Vince McMahon. I always wanted to read a book written by Vince McMahon. And you know what? Because of everything that happened with Vince McMahon, we probably may never get that. Vince's attempt to stop the documentary, he really didn't want anybody to watch that, and he tried to block the rights. And if he blocked the rights, Vince McMahon's got enough money that he can pay a production studio, he could be the executive producer, and he could put it together in the way that he wanted for us to enjoy it. But I like the way that it came out. I would like to see another episode. They could be probably another whole season that they got, Mr. McMahon 2, or maybe Mr. McMahon Uncut. Instead of being 6 episodes, it could probably be 12 episodes. I don't know. I just can't wait to see. I just want to remind everybody that's watching right now that I got beautiful Buddy Thomas. He's a pro wrestler. He's joining me this Tuesday live at noon Eastern right here on YouTube. If you like what I'm doing, go ahead and subscribe so that you don't miss it. I don't only do reviews on things in pro wrestling, but I also talk about interviews. I interview pro wrestlers and other pro wrestling personalities live right here on the Tristen Law Show for your entertainment. I'm going to take a look at some of the comments that I put on Threads. On Threads, I posted a question, and the question was, hey, Wrestling Threads, what did you think of Mr. McMahon on Netflix? So we're going to take a look at that. Right now, I got a message from J__Ray. He said that it was pretty solid doc. Like any research one does, no one should use one source. Mr. McMahon is a pretty good addition to the various sources revealing VKM Vincent Kennedy McMahon's actions as the WWF grew into what it is today. I don't get folks who are disappointed that there are no bombshells. The series reports on his adultery, sexual allegations against him, and shares a lot of the Janelle Grant stuff. Many legends are shown to still be licking boots, and it's licking Vince McMahon's boots, and it's digestible for non-hardcore fans. He glad it exists. Thank you so much, J__Ray, for your comment. So when he's talking about the legends that are licking Vince McMahon's boots, he's probably talking about one being Hulk Hogan. And look, I say Hulk Hogan's a liar, so I didn't really believe anything that Hulk Hogan said. He probably just trying to make, he's probably working everybody. But you got to think about it like this, right? These people were made millionaires, billionaires, household names by Vince McMahon, right? I think that I agree with the fact that it was a pretty solid documentary. I agree that I expected some kind of bombshell, but there was no kind of bombshell as well in that documentary, and I'm glad that it exists, and I'm encouraging everybody to go ahead and check it out. I got another comment from the Bad Pat Ryan. The Bad Pat Ryan says he gives it a 6.5 out of 10. He would have said higher if he wasn't a pro wrestling fan. He feels that it was a little bit too gentle with Vince. He said none of the information was new, but it was presented very well. Great editing. It looked nice. He wouldn't call it a must-watch, but it was good. Thank you so much for your comments. I agree that it is that it was presented real well, that it was edited real well. I would definitely give it a higher rating than you give it, but you know what? I appreciate your comments still. I asked you what I thought, and you gave me what you thought. I got another comment from College Wood ASC. There are a few sections I found interesting. First, anyone in the company talking about Chris Benoit was huge. He also feels that all of the Shane McMahon stuff is very interesting. He feels bad for Shane. Thank you so much for your comment. And when he was talking about feeling bad for Shane, it was like one of those things where Shane McMahon had to compete for his dad's attention, for his dad's approval, that so much that he had to jump off of the top of the Hell in the Cell to do crazy things just to win his approval of his dad. And one of the things that I think about as a parent, 100%, because I have a son as well too, a little boy, and I talk, and maybe one day he'll join me when he's old enough. Me and him will podcast together. I don't know. But one of the things I always think about is, am I making a good enough, setting a good enough example for my kid, right? Am I making my kid work too hard to live up to these standards that I think that he should live in? Let's jump over to the chat real quick on YouTube Live and see some of the comments that we got. I asked, what did you think of Mr. McMahon on Netflix? David Roscoe said, Vince McMahon is the Nikolai something ripoff. Okay. Thomas James said Vince McMahon quitting was the best thing to ever happen to WWE. You know what? I agree. Thank you so much, guys, for your comments. Thomas, I agree that the best thing to ever happen to WWE was for Vince McMahon to quit, because when Vince McMahon first bought the WWF from his dad, he was such a forward thinker. And I think that just like any good machine, the machine just pretty much just gets out of date. Vince McMahon wasn't up to date or in tune with the things that were happening in the real world. I think that Triple H, since he's younger, he has young kids as well too. He has his pulse on what is important and what is popular. Thank you so much for your comments. And if you're watching live, thank you so much for your comments as well too. We got another comment on Threads. It says, it's from IAM_so faded. It says, my biggest takeaway is blank Hulk Hogan. How you want to sell out your coworkers for unionizing? WTF. True. Good point. It was talked about how Hulk Hogan was the one that snitched when Jesse Ventura wanted to unionize pro wrestling, and pro wrestling would be a much different place right now if it was unionized. But I feel that somebody like Hulk Hogan, who was making lots of money, would have probably made less. There were people that were less than him on the card that would have had to made almost comparable money. And that probably would have took out of his pocket. So, you know what? I don't fault Hulk Hogan for doing what he did, because anybody in their right mind probably would have did the same exact thing as well too, because the union didn't work for him. Right? But you know what? In the grand scheme of things, looking at it years later, maybe we would have had a lot less people die or get injured, or they probably wouldn't have to work so many days had there been a union. I don't know. We got one more comment from Threads. It's from Zachinthus. He says that I think the first episode, which is what he's seen so far, did a really good job showing Vince's journey from unloved child to success story. He's heard or read different things about the other parts, but he'll have to see them to make his own conclusions. Wrestling Threads. Thank you so much for your comments. I appreciate your comments. Subscribe to the Tristen Law Show. I appreciate the subscription. If you're watching this live right now, if you're watching this on demand, I know it's a little bit kind of long, but it's a lot. It was over 6 hours of documenting that we had to go into. So subscribe. I'm humbled by everybody that subscribes. I'm humbled by everybody that watches. Believe me, it's not something that I'm just saying. It's something that I truly mean from my heart. But just to recap my thoughts on the summary and on the whole Mr. McMahon documentary on Netflix, it's a must watch. I think it was good. I don't think that they played Mr. McMahon a little bit too far left. I don't think they played Vince McMahon a little bit too far right. I think they played everything just in the middle. That's what Vince said. We don't know who is who. We don't know where is what. I think that it was great to finally hear everything from Vince McMahon's mouth himself about his persona, you know, about his personal life, about his marriage, about his kids, about his family, about how he built the business. If I didn't take anything out of this at all, I looked at how to properly build a business and how, you know what, sometimes you just got to take a risk. Scared money don't make no money. And you know what? Vince McMahon wasn't scared a lot of times to make some money. And that's what I take from there. And I appreciate Vince McMahon's time that he took. And even though he couldn't control it, you know what? I hope that there's more stuff that made the cutting room floor that we get to see a little bit later on. But thanks so much for joining me here on the Tristen Law Show. Don't forget to join me on Tuesday when I have beautiful Buddy Thomas. He'll be live here on the Tristen Law Show on YouTube. Do not forget to like, do not forget to subscribe, do not forget to share this with the people that you love. Thank you so much for joining me on the Tristen Law Show,